The grand lobby of the Lux Haven Hotel was the epitome of sophistication, polished marble floors gleaming under the soft glow of chandeliers, the air perfumed with the faint scent of jasmine. Guests moved in and out, some accompanied by bellhops carrying designer luggage, others pausing for photos by the opulent indoor fountain. It was a world where wealth and class reigned supreme. And first impressions mattered. Ice Spice, dressed in a simple oversized hoodie, ripped jeans, and sneakers, stepped inside. Her copper curls framed her face, and her trademark chain glinted faintly beneath the fabric of her hoodie. She had just returned from a low-key studio session, preferring the comfort of her casual attire over the flashy ensembles she wore on stage. Her eyes scanned the room as she approached the front desk. The receptionist, a woman in her mid-40s with a sharp bob and an even sharper gaze, looked up briefly before her lips pressed into a thin line. Ice smiled warmly. "Hi," she began, her tone polite yet relaxed. "I need to check on a reservation." The receptionist didn't smile back. Instead, she gave Ice a cursory once-over, the type of glance that spoke volumes. "You don't belong here." "Do you have a reservation?" the woman asked, her tone clipped. "Yes," Ice said patiently, pulling out her phone. "It should be under. Unfortunately, we don't allow walk-ins without prior booking." The receptionist interrupted. Her voice carried the faintest trace of disdain, masked by professionalism. Ice blinked. "I'm not walking in. I already have a..." "Miss," the receptionist cut her off, this time with an air of finality. "If you'd like to make a reservation, I suggest you visit our website." Several guests in the lobby had begun to notice the interaction. Ice felt the heat of their stares but refused to let it rattle her. She leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but firm. "I'm not here to make a reservation. I'm here because I own this place." The receptionist's carefully maintained expression faltered for a split second before she let out a tight, disbelieving laugh. "I'm sure you are," she said dryly, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Ice straightened, her jaw tightening. She didn't need to cause a scene. Instead, she turned and walked away, leaving the receptionist muttering something under her breath. Back in her private penthouse, a sleek, minimalist space on the top floor of the hotel, Ice stared out at the glittering city skyline. Her phone buzzed on the counter. "You good?" her manager, Brielle, asked when Ice picked up. "I'm fine," Ice replied, though the words felt hollow. "What happened?" Ice hesitated. She didn't want to sound overly sensitive or dramatic. But the encounter at the front desk had struck a nerve. It wasn't the first time she had been judged for her appearance or underestimated because of her identity. But this time, it was personal. This was her hotel, a project she had poured her heart into when she decided to invest in hospitality. She had envisioned Lux Haven as a place where everyone, regardless of who they were or where they came from, felt welcome. "Just some ignorance," she finally said. Brielle sighed. "You're not gonna let it slide, you?" Ice's lips curved into a small, humorless smile. "You know me better than that." The following day, Ice reviewed the hotel's internal records and security footage of the lobby. It wasn't hard to find other examples of discriminatory behavior. A young black couple was given a less favorable room than they had booked. An older Asian woman was ignored by waitstaff in the restaurant. A staff meeting from months ago included remarks from a manager dismissing the need for extra sensitivity training. It was clear. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a systemic issue. Ice's hands tightened into fists as she leaned back in her chair. She thought about her younger self, the girl who had grown up hustling in the Bronx, who had dreamed of breaking barriers and proving that success wasn't dictated by where you started. She had come too far to let anyone trample on the principles she stood for. This wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had ever been made to feel small, unwelcome, or invisible. And so, she made a decision. She wouldn't announce her ownership or storm into the manager's office demanding change. Instead, she would observe, learn, and uncover every layer of the problem. If she wanted to fix this, she needed to understand it fully. By the end of the day, Ice had called Brielle with her plan. "I'm going undercover," she said, a determined edge in her voice. "Undercover?" Brielle echoed, half amused, half incredulous. "Like a reality TV show?" "Not exactly," Ice replied with a chuckle. "But I'm serious. I'm gonna work there, blend in. See what's really going on. If I show up as me, they'll just act fake. And what happens when they figure out who you are?" Ice's smile turned cold. "Then they'll have to explain why they treated the owner of this place like she didn't belong here." 2 days later, Ice Spice entered the Lux Haven Hotel again, but this time, she wasn't a guest, or even herself. She wore a simple uniform, black slacks, white shirt, and a name tag that read Isis. Her trademark curls were hidden beneath a sleek, low bun. And her chain was tucked away. She was just another new hire learning the ropes. Her first morning on the job started with a staff meeting led by the hotel manager, Richard Marston. He was a tall, middle-aged man with a booming voice and the air of someone who thought he owned every room he walked into. "Remember, presentation is everything," Richard said, pacing in front of the staff like a general addressing his troops. "Guests who can afford this level of luxury expect perfection. Look sharp, act sharp, and above all, don't embarrass yourselves, or me." Ice kept her expression neutral, but Richard's tone grated on her. It was clear he viewed his staff as tools, not people. After the meeting, Ice was paired with Clara, a senior receptionist, for training. Clara was polite but curt, her patience thin as she explained the booking system. "This is the VIP list," Clara said, tapping the screen. "High-profile guests, influencers, celebrities. You'll never deal with them directly. They get handled by Richard or senior management." Ice raised an eyebrow. "What about everyone else?" Clara sighed. "Everyone else is just standard." The words hung in the air. Standard. Ice didn't need to ask to know what that meant. People who didn't fit the image of wealth and privilege the hotel wanted to project. Over the next week, Ice witnessed more than she had anticipated. One morning, she shadowed a bellhop named Marcus, a young black man with a warm smile that belied his frustration. They were delivering luggage to a suite when Marcus muttered under his breath, "Another one." "Another what?" Ice asked. Marcus hesitated, glancing around to ensure they were alone. "Another guest who acts like I'm invisible unless they need something. Or worse, like I'm stealing their bags." Ice's stomach tightened. She had seen the subtle side glances some guests gave Marcus as he walked by, their hands unconsciously tightening on their belongings. Later that day, Ice noticed Clara handling a guest with a thinly veiled tone of irritation. The woman was a middle-aged black guest asking about her room's view. Clara, her patience wet, gave a dismissive explanation before quickly turning to another guest, a white man in a suit, with a radiant smile. When the woman walked away, Clara muttered to another receptionist, "Some people can't afford to be picky." Ice clenched her fists. She wanted to call Clara out right then and there but knew she had to stay undercover. One of the most revealing moments came during a lunch break in the staff lounge. Ice sat quietly at a corner table, listening as two senior staff members discussed the type of clientele the hotel attracted. "Some of them just don't fit the brand," one of them said, stirring his coffee. "You mean the ones who walk in here looking like they stumbled off the street?" the other joked. They laughed, oblivious to Ice sitting nearby. Her chest burned with anger, but she stayed silent, filing away every comment for later. Despite the tension, Ice found allies among the staff who had experienced similar treatment. Marcus became a confidant, sharing stories of how he and other employees of color were often overlooked for promotions or reprimanded more harshly than their peers. "You'd think working in a place like this would mean opportunities," Marcus said one evening as they cleaned up after a staff event. "But it's like there's an unspoken rule: look the part, or stay in the background." Ice nodded, her resolve hardening with every word. Her most significant breakthrough came when she discovered an internal document outlining the hotel's guest prioritization policy. While it didn't explicitly mention race or class, the language was clear. Guests who appeared affluent or influential were given preferential treatment, while others were categorized as low priority. Ice took a photo of the document with her phone. This was the smoking gun she needed. The final straw came during a gala event hosted in the hotel's ballroom. Ice was assigned to assist with guest check-ins, standing quietly behind Clara as she greeted the arrivals. A black couple dressed in elegant evening wear approached the desk, their smiles warm. "Good evening," the man said. "We're here for the gala." Clara's smile froze, her eyes scanning them quickly. "Your names?" she asked, her tone noticeably cooler than it had been with previous guests. The couple exchanged a glance, the woman raising an eyebrow but staying composed. "Dr. Langston and Mrs. Langston," the man said evenly. Clara tapped on the keyboard, her movements deliberate. Ice, standing beside her, could see the name clearly listed on the guest list, but Clara hesitated. I'm sorry," Clara said finally, her voice sugary but insincere. "It seems there's been a mix-up." "Are you sure you're on the guest list?" "Yes, I'm sure," Dr. Langston replied, his voice calm but firm. "We RSVP'd weeks ago." "Check again." Clara opened her mouth to respond. But before she could say anything more, Ice stepped forward. "It's right there," she said, pointing at the screen. Her tone left no room for argument. Clara's face reddened, and she quickly printed their badges, handing them over with a tight smile. "Enjoy the gala," she said, but the damage was done. The Langstons walked away, but not without casting a knowing look in Ice's direction. She nodded slightly, silently apologizing for what they had endured. When the rush of guests slowed, Clara turned to Ice, her tone icy. "You're supposed to let me handle the guests. Trainees don't intervene." Ice met her gaze evenly. "I was just doing my job. Treating all guests with respect, remember?" Clara's lips thinned, but she said nothing, turning back to her work. By the end of the night, Ice had seen enough. She had observed the patterns, collected the evidence, and spoken with enough employees to confirm that the culture of discrimination ran deep. As she walked back to her penthouse, the weight of everything she had witnessed settled heavily on her shoulders. She had known this wouldn't be easy, but the extent of the problem was worse than she had imagined. Standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows of her suite, Ice looked out over the city. Her reflection stared back at her, calm, determined, unyielding. She had gone undercover to see the truth, and now she had it. The next step? Making sure the entire hotel felt the impact of that truth. The boardroom of Lux Haven Hotel was a pristine and imposing space. Its long mahogany table surrounded by high-backed leather chairs. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the polished surfaces. On any other day, the room exuded power and exclusivity, a sanctuary for the hotel's elite decision-makers. Today, however, tension hung in the air like a storm cloud. The department heads, managers, and senior executives were seated, murmuring among themselves. At the head of the table sat Richard Marston, the hotel manager, his posture confident, though the furrow in his brow betrayed his unease. He glanced at his watch, annoyed by the unscheduled meeting that had been called by an anonymous stakeholder. When the door opened, the room fell silent. Ice Spice entered, no longer the unassuming trainee Isis, but herself, a global music sensation with an unmistakable aura of confidence. She was dressed sharply in a tailored black suit, her curls free and framing her face, her presence commanding the room. Richard blinked, momentarily stunned, before recovering. "Miss Spice," he said, forcing a smile. "This is unexpected. How can we help you?" Ice took her time, walking to the front of the room and placing a sleek laptop on the table. She didn't sit. Instead, she scanned the faces of those seated, noting the confusion, and in some cases, recognition, in their expressions. "How can you help me?" she repeated, her voice steady but sharp. That's funny. I think the real question is, how can you help yourselves? A murmur rippled through the room. Richard cleared his throat. I'm not sure I understand. Oh, you'll understand, Ice interrupted. Her tone icy. She clicked a button on her laptop, and the screen at the front of the room lit up. The first video played. A recording from the lobby security cameras showing Clara dismissing the black couple at the gala. The footage was clear, the condescension in her body language and tone undeniable. The room grew quiet. Ice turned to Richard. This is what your guests experience. Disrespect. Discrimination. And it's not an isolated case. Without giving him a chance to respond, she played another clip, this time of the receptionist brushing her off during her first visit, refusing to even check her reservation. The timestamp and context made it clear who the guest was. Gasps filled the room as several executives leaned forward, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock. Richard's face reddened. Miss Spice. I don't think it's fair to. Ice cut him off again. Fair? You want to talk about fair? Let's talk about your prioritization policies. She pulled up the internal document she had photographed, projecting it onto the screen. The language, while carefully worded, painted a damning picture of the hotel's bias toward preferred guests and the subtle disregard for others. This, I said, her voice rising slightly, is the culture you've allowed to thrive in this hotel. A culture where guests and employees of color are treated as second class. A culture where bias and ignorance go unchecked. Richard tried to maintain his composure, but beads of sweat were forming on his forehead. I don't believe this reflects our values as an organization, he stammered. Doesn't it? Ice countered. Because I've spent the past 2 weeks undercover in your hotel. I've seen it firsthand. From the way your staff is trained, or not trained, to the way management perpetuates this toxic environment. This is your culture. The room was silent. No one dared to speak. Ice leaned forward, placing her palms flat on the table. I didn't build this hotel to be a playground for prejudice. Lux Haven was supposed to be a space where everyone feels valued, respected, and welcomed. Instead, it's become a reflection of everything I stand against. She straightened, her gaze sweeping across the room. That changes today. Over the next hour, Ice laid out her plan for a complete overhaul of the hotel's operations. Diversity and inclusion training would be mandatory for all employees, from frontline staff to senior executives. A new hiring initiative would prioritize underrepresented groups in leadership roles. Guest service protocols would be rewritten to ensure every guest received the same level of respect and care, regardless of their background. To drive home her point, Ice announced the immediate dismissal of several managers, including Richard. Leadership starts at the top, she said bluntly. And if the top is rotten, everything below it suffers. Richard opened his mouth to protest, but one look from Ice silenced him. Finally, she turned to the remaining staff. This isn't just about saving face or avoiding bad press. This is about rebuilding trust. Not just with our guests, but with each other. Lux Haven will be a place of inclusion. Or it won't exist at all. By the time the meeting ended, the boardroom was a mix of shock, guilt, and tentative hope. Ice left the room without looking back, her heart pounding. She had exposed the truth and set the wheels of change in motion, but she knew the real work was just beginning. As she stepped into the elevator, Marcus was waiting in the lobby. Having heard whispers of the meeting, he gave her a knowing look. How'd it go? He asked. I smiled faintly. They know who I am now. Marcus grinned. Good. Now they'll see what you're about. Ice nodded, determination burning in her chest. They will. Trust me. 6 months later, Lux Haven Hotel was unrecognizable. The once gleaming, unwelcoming walls now pulsed with a warmth that wasn't just aesthetic, it was felt. A new energy buzzed through the lobby, where a diverse team of employees greeted guests with genuine smiles. The change wasn't just surface level, it was woven into the very fabric of the hotel's operations. But the transformation hadn't been easy. After the fallout from Ice Spice's confrontation with the management team, the hotel underwent a period of upheaval. Richard Marston and several other senior leaders were replaced with professionals who aligned with the new vision of inclusion and respect. Ice handpicked a new general manager, Evelyn Carter, a seasoned hospitality expert known for championing diversity in her previous roles. The first order of business was tackling the staff culture. Evelyn spearheaded a series of mandatory training sessions that delved into unconscious bias, cultural sensitivity, and effective communication. These weren't your typical corporate workshops. ICE insisted they be raw and impactful. Employees were encouraged to share their experiences, and some of the stories that surfaced were heartbreaking. Marcus, the bellhop, recounted how he had spent years being treated as invisible by guests and overlooked by management. Clara, the receptionist, admitted she hadn't realized how ingrained her biases were until ICE's intervention. "I was part of the problem," Clara confessed during one session, her voice shaking. "But I want to be part of the solution." ICE attended many of these sessions herself, sitting in the circle with the staff, listening, and sharing her own experiences. Her presence reminded everyone why this work mattered. The guest experience also underwent a radical overhaul. The outdated prioritization policies were scrapped and replaced with a new motto: "Every guest, every moment, matters." The staff was trained to treat every visitor with the same level of care, whether they were a high-profile celebrity or a solo traveler on a budget. To ensure accountability, ICE implemented a feedback loop where guests and employees could report concerns directly to her office. Anonymous complaints were investigated thoroughly, and swift action was taken when necessary. One notable change was the addition of cultural ambassadors to the team, staff members who were trained to assist guests from diverse backgrounds and ensure their needs were met. The changes extended beyond the hotel's walls. ICE and Evelyn launched a community outreach program that partnered with local organizations to provide job training and opportunities for underprivileged individuals. Lux Haven became known for its inclusive hiring practices, bringing in employees from all walks of life, including refugees, single parents, and individuals with disabilities. The transformation wasn't without resistance. Some staff members left, unable or unwilling to adapt to the new culture. A few longtime guests, accustomed to the old ways, complained about the changes, claiming the hotel had lost its exclusivity. But ICE stood firm. "Exclusivity doesn't mean exclusion," she said in an interview with a major news outlet. "It means creating a space so extraordinary that everyone feels like they belong." That's luxury. The real test of Lux Haven's transformation came during its grand reopening gala. ICE, alongside Evelyn and the new leadership team, welcomed a packed house of guests, media, and community members. The event was a celebration of the hotel's rebirth, but it also carried a deeper message. Lux Haven was a beacon of what the hospitality industry could, and should, be. The gala's guest list was a tapestry of diversity: artists, business leaders, activists, and everyday travelers. Among them was the Langston couple, who had nearly been turned away months earlier. This time, they were greeted with warm smiles and escorted to their suite as honored guests. In her opening speech, ICE addressed the crowd, her voice steady and passionate. Lux Haven was built to be more than a hotel. It was meant to be a symbol of possibility, a place where every guest, employee, and visitor feels seen, valued, and celebrated. We lost sight of that, but we found our way back. And now, Lux Haven isn't just a brand. It's a promise. The applause was thunderous. But what mattered most to ICE was the shift she felt in the room. This wasn't just a performance, it was real. As the night wound down, Marcus found ICE standing on the rooftop terrace, looking out over the city. "You did it," he said, handing her a glass of champagne. "We did it," she corrected, clinking her glass against his. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the journey settling between them. This place feels different now, Marcus said softly. Like it actually belongs to everyone. Ice smiled, a sense of peace washing over her. That's how it should have been all along. The Lux Haven Hotel had become a haven in the truest sense of the word, not just for its guests, but for the people who made it what it was. And as Ice stood there, surrounded by the city lights and the sound of laughter from below, she knew this was only the beginning.